So welcome to the interview. And today we have a special guest, a friend, a quilter, and someone who is a survivor of September 11th. And that's Georgia Osterman. Welcome and thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
For
4.5 years, when the election came about and the Republicans took over the House of Representatives under Newt Gingrich, and we were, because we'd worked for Democratic chairman, you're there at the pleasure of the chairman. So I ended up going over to work for the Secretary of the Navy and the Undersecretary of the Navy. And I got that job because what I did on the House Armed Services Committee was very similar to what they needed over there. And I was hired under what was called the Ramspect Act. The Ramspect Act, as far as I know, doesn't exist anymore. But there was a number of us that were able to transition our legislative years and skills over to the Pentagon. And so I went to work for the Undersecretary of the Navy for doing a lot of classified work. He wanted someone who was a civilian civil servant that would interface between the Schedule C political appointees and the Navy and Marine Corps leadership. And so I had a very high level job, and that's how I was there. And I retired from there in 2005 from the Pentagon.
And in all, how many years had you of civil service at that point? In 2001, how many years had you been doing civil service?
19. Well, I retired at 57 with 32 years. So do the math, 4 years.
Well, congratulations. Yeah, absolutely.
32 years. But I'm not good at the math right now. But anyway, it was a good number of years. And I'm 73 now.
Excellent.
73 years old.
And so at that point, what was a typical day like? What was an average day at the Pentagon?
Well, for me, because I had to kind of wait in queue to see the Undersecretary, many times it was early in the morning when I would have to go in before his regular meetings, or I would have to stay late in the evening to get time with him. I would have to spend time briefing him on a lot of activities and classified actions. And sometimes he would have a lot of questions and sometimes he wouldn't. So I learned how to talk very fast. And it was, there were lots of good fun parts of it. And I got a lot of good exposure and I gave them a lot of benefit of my experience, having worked on Capitol Hill for all these years as well. So it was a good job.
And so the work
kind of tough.
The work on the Capitol had really prepared you for what it was you were doing at the Pentagon.
Yes. And when Richard Danzig was the Undersecretary at the time, and when he hired me and I realized what I would be doing there, I went home and cried because of the responsibility that was laid on me. And I would get approvals for a lot of activities classified among the top leadership, including Chief Naval Operations or his vice or the Commandant or the ACMEC. The General Counsel of the Navy was always, I had lawyers and I used them. And yeah, that was pretty much my routine for those years that I was there. So I was there about 10 years doing that job. And when 9/11 came along, I had to be back in working right after that. And so they were getting ready then under Bush to go into Iraq and to go into Afghanistan. And so I was exposed constantly to the intelligence arena and the military operations that were to be conducted. And yeah, so, and I was the last one to approve or to put my signature on those items before it went to the secretary. So, yeah, I hit the ground running, but I had a lot of people that supported me in that job that I could call on. So, when I left in 2005, it was a change of administrations also, and they didn't fill that for a long time. Yeah.
Well, why do you think that is?
That they did not fill it?
Yeah.
Because it was very hard to find someone who had all the clearances across the board. I had, over the years, when I worked on the House Armed Services Committee, I worked for the Procurement and Military Nuclear Systems Subcommittee for a period of time. That's where I started out. And so I had clearances from the Department of Energy for the nuclear weapons side. Of course, the Navy has submarines and missiles. So I had when I worked on the House, I would do the conferences for the staff director. I worked very close with them. And so I had a broad experience with the appropriations and the other committees on the House and the Senate. So, yeah, it was,
Understood.
It was a cool job.
Cool job. And you had all the sort of the level of expertise you'd already set by what you'd done allowed you access with clearances that just aren't that commonly all put together in one place.
Most people would not have.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that was how I advised the secretary and the undersecretary, because I had those capabilities.
The right background, absolutely. If we can just go to the day itself, to September 11, 2001, and how did that day play out for you?
Well, I was living over in Vienna, Virginia. And so I would take the metro in and change at Roslyn and then going in. So it was an early morning thing. And I had a meeting to get a signature from then secretary. Or actually it was the night before. But the document that I was transmitting, I had to deliver it someplace else. And that place just happened to be on the side where the plane hit. And I was on the 5th floor, and I was on the outside ring. You know, everybody knows there's an E ring for the leadership, but I was up on the top floor, and I had gone around to take my pouch. I was carrying orange pouches around, and I had done that. And we were looking at the camera, and I had not realized, because I was so busy getting done what I had to do, that the plane had hit New York. And so the staff were at the window looking out, and as you look out to the D ring, and they were looking at the camera. And I came in and I saw what they were saying, and I sought out the person that I needed to give this document to, and we went into his office just right next door. And I said to him, as we were walking from one door to the other, I said, I'm surprised they have not hit the Pentagon or targeted the Pentagon. And it was almost less than a minute. I was standing in front of his desk. He was standing up against the window, and the plane hit. And I cannot tell you how the explosion sounded. It rings in my ears to this day, but I can't make the sound. But we were in the new section that had been under construction, and no one had told us how that was. There were escalators they had put in, And we had only just those people had just newly moved into that office. And so it knocked the whole window out and toward me as the bellowing smoke and fire went up, and you could smell the fuel oil and the heat that pushed. And so the guy flew over the table into me, and I flew back out the door. And so there were some other staff that were trying to get us out, and we went out that door and we went around to the right. But that's the way I had just come in, by way the 4th floor, and had taken that stairwell up to the 5th and come around and gone in that office. So as they wanted to go down the stairwell, there was fire billowing up. So we had to turn around and go back. And so it's not a real wide corridor. There's no windows on that outer ring or anything, but as we started to come back, I could feel a step that was about maybe 2 feet. I kind of had to jump a little bit. And my orientation, I was like, I don't remember that. You know, that wasn't supposed to be there. Well, afterwards, where you see the picture of where it had crashed and fallen in, that was the beginning of it. So that's where that step was. That we then went around and went down through the middle of the Pentagon and across and out. And I ended up over on the Route 110 going north between 95 and Roslyn. And that's where we were. And I could not remember. I wanted to get in touch with my family, you know, to tell them I was okay. My brother had been in the Army, had worked, I had gotten 1 year out of him that we were in the Pentagon together. And then my daughter had, during the summer, had worked at the preschool or daycare center during the summer. And so she would have known. But I could not get in touch with them until way late. But I couldn't remember a phone number. That's how in shock I think I was. And I knew a friend up in New Jersey, and I knew one of the staff gave me the phone number, and I called him, and he didn't even have the TV on. He was clueless. And I said, I'm okay, you know. But it wasn't until later in the afternoon when we had hitched a ride, kind of walked over to Crystal City from there. And there was an office, and your gentleman that I knew lived out near Vienna. We got in his car, and, you know, I got to my house, and my house was very locked up. I didn't have my keys. I didn't have my ID. It was just what I was worn to work. And I knew the lady across the street, and I went over to her, and she opened her door, and she said, "Oh, Georgia, look what they've done to your Pentagon." And she had the TV on, and I did not know at that time that part of the Pentagon had fallen in. And then I started to hear the damage, and so I dealt a lot with the Navy intelligence offices and the people, and they had just finished a briefing, and a lot of those people were killed, and it was sad. But then my brother, who I said had been in the Army, and he lived not too far from me, he had set up a triage. And had been in touch with my children. Well, they weren't children, they were two grown young women with children of their own. And so that they all gathered. We went to an Italian restaurant right up the street there in Vienna. and they got me have something to eat and a couple of good glasses of red wine. And so they stayed with me, but then my daughter took me back into work to get my card, my ID on that Friday. I just couldn't do it before then. And it's something I'll never forget. And then after I got back, then it was the response to the attack and the preparations that went into going into Iraq and then Afghanistan. And so I ended up after a couple of weeks, I was talked to the people from the Victims Fund from New York, the Red Cross had, and I was able to seek some help, but I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I had that today. If I now live out near Dulles Airport, well, not far enough, but the planes leave and go, and sometimes I know the sounds of the planes, an abnormal plane sound. My ears go up like a dog's ears, and yeah, so it's still there after 20 years. So I still have that. Not as much, you know. I mean, I know, but I think a lot of it was because of my knowledge there. And when the plane hit and we were trying to get out, I had a scarf and I was holding it up to my nose because of the smoke and stuff. And I thought it was going to be chemical weapons. I thought the plane was probably going to release something chemical, and it didn't. And when the first 20 minutes, half an hour went by, and that had not happened. But I thought my initial thought was that. I don't know if other people thought that or not, but at that time, there was a lot of talk in the public domain, even about, you know, chemical weapons being dispersed and how they would do that, sarin gases and things of that sort. So they were not that sophisticated, but they were pretty sophisticated. People say that if the plane had been 10 feet higher, they would have hit right there. And so I'm very fortunate. I'm very blessed.
What a horrific experience.
Yeah.
Was there any, at what point did the idea of sort of figuring out who was behind it catch up? You know, when it's actually happening, there's no time to really think about that kind of thing. And as you mentioned, there was a person who said to you, the person you were with sort of had said, you know, gosh, I don't even know why, I don't know why they haven't attacked here. But the who of it is, how did that come out as far as you remember?
I was not surprised, you know, when they said that it was, you know, bin Laden and those folks that were, once they said that or suspected, you know, it was logical to me that was happening. And going into Iraq, we had also been doing a lot of studies and things like that. So I kind of figured, I wasn't surprised. I'll just put it that way. I didn't say, oh, I'm going to figure that person, you know.
Right. Yeah. And
it's hard to remember years.
Right. Surely. And afterwards you say you were able to get to your things, that they were able to take you and recover your keys and your cards, etc. Had those been removed and taken somewhere else, or did you actually get back into the structure?
No, And my office was around not too far from where the Secretary of the Navy, I was just above him. So I would go up and down between the 4th and the 5th floor. My office was a closed skiff. So and I had a Navy chief, Cheryl Alger, and she was awesome because she and her husband had been involved with the emergency rescue when they had been down in Pensacola. They were both Navy chiefs, and actually, she was written up, and they also wrote. I was in that story, and so I understand there was a recent documentary. I haven't seen it, so I don't know if it's the same title or not. That was on. Can I say the channel? CBS. You'll edit it anyway. And it's called The Women's War. And the gentleman who wrote it, I have to put my glasses back on, but I'll just show it to you.
If you can bring it to the center, yeah.
And in that, they mentioned the story. Oh, there they are. And it's written about people all over the world that they interviewed. And she was interviewed, and her quote was, here it said that, she said, well, quoted, "My initial thought was, oh God, my boss, Georgia." If you look at the pictures taken right after the collapse, the 5th floor was one of our offices, and she was supposed to be over there. I was thinking, was Georgia in there? Was she on the way back to her office? And it says that she did not know until later that evening. And she says, all I could think about was that Georgia had headed that direction and she was still there or somewhere in between. And when she reached the 6th corridor, Defense Protective Service was directing everyone out of the A ring. So this affirms the story that I told you. So it's written up, and that's a bit of an honor to have that posterity for my children and my heritage. So.
Absolutely. What's the most memorable part of the day for you? Obviously, I mean, other than you mentioned when there's the breach first occurs and you start to get a sense of heat. But now that we're on the other end of it, 20 years, looking back, what do you think of the response that the country has given to the attacks on 9/11? Do you think that we've taken care of what we need to, or what are your thoughts now?
Well, I'm really glad it's about time they got out of Afghanistan. And at the time when they were going into Iraq, I sounded what I could sound for GS-15, civil servant. I said, there's no exit strategy. There's no exit strategy. There's no exit strategy. And I did not see one. And it was way above mine and their pay grade, I think, at the point about whether or not they went into Iraq. And if you remember the testimony at the UN and individuals that went up there and talked about weapons of mass destruction. And as a reason for going into Iraq. And then they found out later that there were no weapons of mass destruction. And I'm not going to, it's not my job to go further than that. But then when they went in Afghanistan, and if anybody were to look at the history of Afghanistan, and when the Russians were in there, and then they vacated, the English had been in there, French had been there, I'm actually reading about the history of England right now, volume 1 and volume 2. And in there, it talks about India and the Far East and Pakistan and Afghanistan. And so the English, when they're in India, came back out. So everybody's had their turn as far as my personal perspective over history. And it's 70-something. I think I can say that.
Absolutely. But and at the information that you had and the level that you were at, you were, you saw the same thing. There was a quagmire being set up, no exit strategy. It wasn't gonna. It was something that would cause us to have to extract ourselves instead of having an end game and achieving it and getting out.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a no-win situation all the way around, and so it was just how long were we going to be there.
Is there something that we didn't touch on that you would like to say?
Yeah, I would like to say about how I came into retirement. After that, I ended up, after 9 months of being retired in 2005, I ended up going to work at the Maryland General Assembly for the gentleman who was the parliamentarian later. There was a job opening for the Montgomery County delegation, and that's how I started out. And I went from that GS-15, Step 9, high level at the pinnacle places of the government to making coffee and working for at minimum wage. And I was there like 7 years, and I was able to get an IRA because civil service, you don't have IRAs. And so I just packed that money into an IRA. And so I have a nice little nest egg sitting there in the credit union, which is part of it. And then I got into quilting. And so my passion is quilting, and I have behind me a quilt, if I can just hold it up. It's my commemorative to 9/11. It is, I don't know if you can see it or not. Hold up. This is it. And the Pentagon is at the center of it. And the butterflies represent where the plane hit and where the souls, and that's what it's called, the souls of the Pentagon.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, so that's one of them. But I went on to do a lot of creations, and I have won a number of awards at Maryland State Fairs. And this one I just did is for my daughter, who she is a teacher of teachers in Anne Arundel County. And after COVID, and the teachers not being there for almost 2 years, so she's coaching them. And I like mother like daughter, like daughter like mother. And she said it was a 6-sided table, and she said she wanted this kind of a quilt, and I didn't realize that the 6 sides represent the 6 sides of the table for these teachers. So it's going to be their centerpiece. So that's the way my life is now. I'm much happier.
Wonderful, wonderful art.
And I watch a lot. I watch TV, and then I don't watch TV. and I second guess, and there are a couple of people that are prominent in the news world now. Some retired admirals, 4 and 5 stars, that are now consultants for major news things, and I had worked with them, just an example. So it's my first broadcast.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for letting me interview you, and thank you for sharing that traumatic time that you went through, and we're so happy that you're here.